Let's talk about conflicts. One of the biggest topics to talk about in modern worlds as complexity increases and the ability to resolve conflict decreases. This is something that costs a lot of energy and time and really leads to dissatisfaction. So it's worth learning how to navigate it. When it comes to conflict, something important is to understand the problem is not the conflict. Conflicts are an engine for improvement. Conflict requests in us that we collaborate, that we share our needs and desires and priorities so that we can collaborate to find a solution. But sometimes emotions get in the way, sometimes hormones get in the way, sometimes inability to put yourself in the other person's perspective gets in the way, and very often lack of time, ability, resources, capacities is really the reason why things heat up. So the number one key resource to have is the ability to lead yourself, to resource yourself, and to make sure that you are in the best version that you can be, meaning sleep, water, movement, motivation, energy, all of that. And then it helps to also rewire the brain in regards to understanding what is happening, being able to structure, being able to see what does the relationship need, what does the moment need. So we're going to dive into a little bit more of the matters for the brain, understanding what is a conflict and giving it a little bit more, let's say, meat on the bones so that you enjoy conflict more, have less the feeling of overwhelm and floodedness when a conflict comes your way. Let me share the screen and show you a few thoughts and visualizations. So here we are. Very often, what happens in a conflict situation can be captured by this image that we see at the top of this. Even in the professional setting, we are always there as the full human that we are, and very often a part of us gets triggered that is actually our inner child or this part of us that doesn't feel safe or has not learned how to navigate this conflict. And that is why personal development or understanding your own dynamics and where you stand in the way of a solution is so important. What I find very important as in supporting your brain is if you find yourself fighting, then find something fighting for, not against. Oftentimes we are fighting, against the other person. Hear me, you must see my point. When really the relationship or the room and the group that we are in requires that we find something worth fighting for. So how can we collaborate better? How can we hear each other better? How can we structure the problem better so that we see each other's points better? Find something to fight for is also, enabling your growth mindset to think for solutions. So conflict, I like this visualization. Conflict is oftentimes connotated with so much negativity when really it is a driving force for change. If you see here this person in the middle and imagine that is you when you are in a conflict situation, then what you feel is on the one side, a logical idea, something that is creatively expanding, that you want to build, that you want to change, that you want to make come true. It's like the prefrontal cortex has it all clear. But then also you are emotionally involved in it. Maybe you are excited. It's something that brings joy to you. It's something that fulfills you. And then somebody else sees it otherwise. And here you are, because it's emotionally charged and because you think you are so right, all of a sudden, like you don't want to change from this situation. And to recognize that you are both emotionally and logically in it is the key for you to understand, okay, hold on. Probably the other person is in the same entanglement and cannot just let it go because they are also emotionally involved. So really a conflict, a tension is something that means we both have needs that want to be expressed and also require collaboration, or else we wouldn't be in this setting right now. And there is from both sides energy to make it come true, to make it happen. Let's not drown it to frustration. Let's learn how to use these energies to really create and build something. So sometimes conflict, tension, a problem is really like the driving force for change. So In that, let's learn how to embrace conflict. Something for your head. A conflict can be classified in either one of the three types. More or less, there's like three types of conflict. And from top to bottom, the difficulty to resolve increases. Most common, and also the good news, the easiest to resolve, is a conflict of interest, which means, you have potentially a conversation about, let's say, salary increase, you want to establish a new database, and the other party, let's say, doesn't want to give you the raise, doesn't want the new database, doesn't have the time to talk to you. All of that requires that we talk, and so to say, try to see each other's perspectives and somewhat tessellate, as in, neither one of us is probably 100% right or wrong, but we need to somewhat layer and like find. I don't like the word compromise necessarily. I really like tessellate, the idea that over time and as we talk and as we explore, something new unfolds that wasn't there before, that I did not think of, that you did not think of, but now it's coming to light as we talk. I like the visualization of, let's say we have a table in the middle and we both hold our cards, and like I play a card and show what I have, and then you play a card and show what you have, and then I reconsider and show the next card. And ideally, we can just put our cards on the table, see each other, and then conclude, oh, like, let's say if you played that card first, then I could play that card second, and we would actually create a win-win setting. That would be the ideal case scenario. But you see, this is conflict of interest. It's primarily in the head. It can get under the skin, but it doesn't have to. Then we have value conflict. Now that gets more tricky, and that is often something that we see on the big political scale of thing unfold, but also in the small, even in couples, even in colleagues, even in different cultures, right? That's the easiest maybe to grasp. If you were raised in a certain culture and the other person in another, we have different values, like deep down in our inner subconsciousness. And all of a sudden, we cannot make sense why the other person would prioritize this higher than the other thing. Let's say, why would you prioritize sustainability over capitalism when clearly capitalism, you could argue from both sides based on your values, and chances are you will not find an agreement. A very simple one is, not simple, but a very common one is a discussion about food. What should schools serve to children? Can we do a vegan day once a week or not? And certain parents are going to fight to the core for not having that, and the others are going to fight till the end to get that. And oftentimes it's not something that can be logically won, because if you look for scientific proof, you will find it from both directions. There is not one right or one wrong. So in that case, also there, ideally, we really must drop into, can I start seeing the other person? Can I make them feel heard, seen, and valued for where they are standing at? And then I can only hope and pray that the other side has an equal level of maturity and also is going to open up for the realization that there is a value conflict and that they are neither right, but only if they ask questions, they will understand where the other person is coming from. And also then we can potentially tessellate. It's easier sometimes as a couple or in a setting where you are committed to figure out a solution. It is much easier and more common if you are not forced to find a solution, that with a value conflicts, you just go different pathways and be like, hey, good vibes only. I don't want to have to deal with that. So also, if you have that in a team and you realize that this is not just a conflict of interest, but it's really a value conflict, and you can have that between generations. You can have, Gen Y, different values than a boomer generation. If you notice, hey, we are talking like cross each other and not meeting each other, it's not interest, it's value. Your leadership job or your facilitator job would be to visualize that and to see that both of you come from a place of best intention, but really why you are not connecting is because there's a value difference. Now, the kind of conflict, the toughest one to resolve and hopefully not in your sphere, is a conflict that involves harm and violence. Now, here we really have to deal with bad intentions, with cruel intentions, with power plays, with the intention of pushing someone down or potentially even hurting their reputation, hurting them physically. That is a whole other level of resolving conflict. And here we don't have, let's say, all the tools that we are practicing in this framework are centered on the first two, because when we have to deal with really harm and violence, it requires a whole other level of resolving, apologizing, and how to team up to even make that visible. So common ways to resolve conflict, just to give you an overview of like what are some of the very common ways. Some of them are better than others. We all learn how to apologize early on in life. It's like educated, taught to us. If you did something and it caused a conflict and now you regret it, learn to apologize. There's an art to apologizing, and even more so than apologizing, I want to say the importance of making the other, like really giving the idea to the other person that you see and understand them. So allowing it time where you really say, yes, I get your point. I'm so sorry I didn't get that earlier. I can see how that must have felt for you, where you really try to create empathy also for the other person to experience, to know that you're really with them on that. Other ways to resolve conflict: compromises, creative compromises, deal making. Sometimes we have situations where people, just ignore the conflict or turn to violence or just give in. That is very common when the amygdala, the reptile part of our brain, is activated. And when we cannot think logically anymore and turn towards, whatever, you will see where it goes. You will get all the problems afterwards. You didn't listen to me, right? That's not helpful for constructive discussion or for the evolution of a team. As a leader, we would like to spot who is, silence and not speaking up, who's potentially afraid to say something. And we want to, involve them because there is knowledge on the other side. We want to be the safest person in the room so that others know that there is safety to speak up, to share something. We could turn towards a mediator or law enforcement or judges. We could have a debate. We could really learn how to actively listen and build the tessellation. So there is no judgment in what of that is better or worse, but these are common ways. Now, this really changed my understanding for conflict, which was a great and powerful tool. Here we have, again, a triangle, and it's the conflict impact triangle, which is very head-centered. And I will show you below the more human-centered version that I love even more. But let's start with the basic two-dimensional version. Every conflict can be separated into three different angles. There are three factors that contribute to the conflict, and therefore conflict resolution can take place at all three levels. I give you an idea of what this means. Maybe you've been to France and in Germany in comparison and have witnessed how parking a car looks different in each of these countries. So in Paris, parking is very scarce and really you use every centimeter that you have. It's very common that when you park into a tight spot, you bump the car in the front, you bump the car in the back, you bump the car in the front, you bump the car in the back. Just, it's a very normal thing to optimize for space. Now, nobody complains about that. Nobody notices even. It's normal. Like the car is a thing to just that is used there. If you were to do the same thing in a different context, let's say in Germany, it would instantly cause a lot of problems. And people witnessing you would come and say, this is not okay. So, depending on the context, the country in this case, or the city, the same situation can lead to a conflict or not. That is very important to understand, because when we talk about changing perspectives, trying to see from the other person's point of view, oftentimes it is from which context are they looking, from which upbringing, perspective, company influence are they, from which direction are they looking, in which context are they placing this, and then also how are they interpreting the situation. For example, do they think I'm doing this on purpose to park the car like this? Are they thinking, no, this makes absolutely sense? They are optimizing for space. How do I interpret the action? And the interpretation is always based on my experiences. Nobody forces me to see things a certain way. So oftentimes when I'm in a conflict situation, I ask myself, would another person interpret the same situation the same way? Usually the answer is no. The reason why it triggers me is rooted in my experience, in my context, in my belief system, in what I think is right or wrong. And so I could also try to look for a different interpretation. What I do is I bring in like inner defense lawyers and imagine like what would have been the good intention of the other person. If I cannot talk to them, or else I reach out to them and talk to them and say, hey, look, like I saw you do this and I was wondering, like for me, it didn't make any sense, but I'm sure it has a good logic to it. And let's just talk about it. Would you mind like taking me along? And I really need to come from that place that is not justify, but that is, I am curious. Now, most common conflict area to observe and where it starts is I need the other person to change the behavior, or I need, the behavior to be changed. And that is oftentimes the hardest to achieve. When I really want, the person to, let's say you are in a meeting room and you are always the one who is facilitating the meeting. Now you want behavior to change. You want the other people to also moderate, to also facilitate. And so, how do I speak up in a way, or how do I see this conflict that I'm having from always doing this when I cannot make the other people do a certain thing? I cannot make them change their behavior. So, those are, let's say, conflicts that we need to have where we talk and try to make visible the interests, the values, and see each other's points. And this is really the human experience where we call each other into greatness, where we walk each other home, where we use the interaction and the conflict that we have to together evolve and grow. So me feeling frustration, I need to grow into how do I speak up for myself? How do I take people along? How do I lead? How do I create energy? How can I come up with creative solutions? How can I visualize the problem? How can I take people along? And for other people's, thereby, there's the invitation to see, oh, yeah, right. Like, how can we find a solution? How can I listen? How can I find empathy for this person? What can we do instead? So, these are important realizations on the subject of conflict. And really, when you feel tension in your body, that's usually the first point to start with conflict, to see, for example, what does the room need, and what kind of conflict are we having? And how can I change my own thinking so that I don't drown in the drama spiral downward, but lift myself up? If I get clear on we're having a conflict of interest, and also, like the conflict is only inside myself because of my interpretation and how I see the context. If I were to put this in a different context, the behavior would make complete sense and the interpretation would be okay. So if I know that, I can regulate myself, I can calm myself down, and then I can find words to say, look, I see this was coming from a place of good intention. You are, as a lawyer, it makes complete sense that you want this to be absolutely right and in correct terms. But let's imagine another group of people, and how would this text be usable for them? So what can we do to also translate it for another setting? Or just to give you an idea of how can you make others feel seen and heard so that that is okay, and also open up for different contexts, different behavior, different interpretation. So the conflict impact pyramid is the evolution of the triangle, because while it makes absolute sense to think about, these areas, it matters, and I said that in the very beginning, who you are on that day. A conflict will grow exponentially the more people we have in a room with lacking resources in regards to capabilities and capacities to be with a conflict, to see it, to think it, to speak it out, to navigate. If we have a room with people who are sleep deprived, who feel anxiety, who are hormones through the roof, who have time and urgency in the neck, then chances are it's going to heat up way faster than if you have a room where people are well rested, well nourished, hormones in balance, capacity to resolve, time at hand, knowledge about, oh, like we are still in the early stage of a decision process. Let's not go ahead. If we have a shared language, shared frames, we can navigate conflict situations much better as a group. So that's why developing shared language with a team is so important. To name these things, to develop empathy, to structure it together. And as you can see from the visualization also, the yellow part is really like a map that helps you see things, but it's almost the Pareto principle, which is this map makes up 20%, but a conflict will always be driven by the inner world, by 80% how well you are rested. If you're already super stressed, amygdala activated, none of the map matters. You won't even be able to get to that point of structuring. You will just be emotionally a wreck. So really doing the self-leadership part is the most important asset. The better you become at regulating yourself, the better you will be at regulating and co-regulating in a room of people where conflict and tension comes up. This is just a short visualization reminder of it helps also to know in which space are we currently navigating. Do I have a conflict inside myself? Is the conflict only affecting me and my role with others? Do we have a conflict that is rather emotional or relationship oriented between me and others? Or is the conflict from this group of people, and how to optimize processes with another group of people can also help to be very clear on structuring what are we actually talking about, and separating emotion from operation or relationships from structures, but always giving the emotional and relational space room, because that is going to be your long-term success factor and the reason why people stay, the reason why people share information. So let me see. Oh, did I go through? Yeah. Let me end with cultivate the ability to be the calmest person in chaotic situations. Calm is contagious. We love people who know how to regulate themselves and others and make each other feel seen, valued, understood.